And we are headed live on Skills Not Pills. So excited to be here again today. Second time today. We're doing two today because we did it a little bit earlier one about sleep. And now we're going to do the science of story. I'm your host, Carrie Hummingbird. I'm so excited to share all this amazing wisdom with you today from so many experts who are really wanting to come in and share what they know about overcoming a variety of challenges with skills, not pills. And of course, today we have another expert with us, Andrea Rabago. Welcome, Andrea.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate and feeling blessed to be here.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you're here. So we are going to talk today about the science of story and how the story that you tell, this fear-based narratives about your chronic illness, let's say, that can really help increase that experience of chronic illness. And that when you change the story, you can actually really change your life. And so I'm really intrigued by this topic because I, of course, changed a lot of my story also by telling a different story, and I changed my life experience. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Andrea, so we can get an idea about who you are.
Hi, okay, thank you. To go back to talk about how the science of story came to be, what happened to me is that when I was a young girl in the late 80s, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And it was about 1988. And back then, synthetic insulin was hot on the market. It was new. So there was a lot of buzz in the research community. They wanted to know, how is this going to work? How is this going to help long-term outcomes? So I was caught in this research center as a young girl. What ended up happening was I took on the fear-based narrative, though, of, hey, you know, your pancreas shot itself up. It's not to be trusted. And so immediately I was not able to trust my body from inside of myself. And to add to that, I had moved from Rhode Island to Texas, so I had gone from city girl to country girl. Nobody could understand my accent, and I was really uncomfortable. So there was a lot of stuff going on outside of me that wasn't safe either. So there was no safety zone, nowhere to go. And that affected me at a deep level. And it's only in retrospect that I realized how profound it was.
Yeah, you know, it's kind of funny how we don't realize the effect of the story until we've sort of been spun up in that story.
Yes.
For a while, and then we start to change the story. I know that in my own journey, I realized that I was the spider weaving the web that was trapping the fly, and I was all of it. I was the spider, the web, and the fly.
So can I speak to that for a second? So here's my story about realizing that I was all of that too. At about age 15, I was invited to go to UT Health Science Center for biofeedback research because I had been on lots of opioids for pain management, and I was getting to the point of addiction, and they wanted to find other ways to take care of me. I was really, really sick. So they take me in, and it's like those new Marvel movies now where, you know, the superhero goes through the transformation and they're plugged into all the electronics. So I'm sitting in this room and I have all the biofeedback stuff onto me, right? All the pulse ox and the respiration stuff. And they put a dot on the wall in mudra. And they said, look at the dot. And they put a tape in the tape deck. And they said, now listen to the tape and do what it says. And I said, okay. So I started listening and doing what the tape said. And very, very quickly, I was able to change my perception and my feedback rhythms, my biorhythms, and I started seeing things differently. And that was a big download for a little sensitive at that age. It was a big dose of information to get. And I think it kind of scared me a little bit. I wasn't ready for that big of a shift. So it taught me some valuable stuff. I learned to check out very easily. I used to like jump into the leaves of plants and just zone out on really cool patterns. So it afforded me that, but I still hadn't quite caught on to how powerful the mind is, and that the mind is really the regulator of everything.
Yeah, and I think as we talked about when we did our pre-interview, we talked about how when you start exploring this territory in your own healing, you meet a lot of resistance.
Ooh. Yes. Yeah, that's me. And we were talking about this, about being sensitive. Um, and I found that, yeah, I didn't want to. I wasn't ready. I didn't want to. My mom would laugh. She'd say, you like to take the hard way. You really, and, but to that point, I didn't know any better. That was how I had learned. I'd learned through suffering and doing these things. So that's how I learned. Like, that's the way it went. So that's the way it went. It wasn't
Yeah.
quite on yet.
Yeah. And then when you start to try to untangle it, you have to kind of step out of a system of thought and into an exploration of possibility where you're really like on the frontier of something new. Like, okay, there's people out there that understand about what we're talking about, like Dr. JoeDispenza, who rebuilt his spine in his mind. He gets it, you know?
To come to your senses, you must go out of your mind.
Yeah. He kind of understands like what's possible, right? Because he teaches people all over the world about this. And I mean, it's remarkable what he was able to achieve. And I think that many more of us now can achieve this, but it takes us stepping out of the comfort zone of what you think is true. Yeah. And going into a whole, like being a frontiers person on a whole new frontier of consciousness to tap in and find out what is possible over here. So tell us about your journey of that, because I know it's hard to make that journey because people want to keep you where you are.
Shoot, I wanted to keep me where I was.
Right.
I was the worst enemy. Oh my gosh, I am something else. The part that took over after the better part of a decade I was in a hospital bed and in and out of coma, I was pissed off. I went through my phase of rebellion, and I did what I wanted, and I led a really acidic lifestyle, and I was careening down this path, right? And it wasn't looking too pretty. So a really big turning point for me was externalizing my own shadow. And I'm really big into shadow work and healing, and I bring this to my practice when working with clients. I think shadow gets a bad rap. It's like, ooh, it's dark and ominous. And essentially, though, and in my world, the way I understand it is shadow is anything that is out of awareness. And so out of my own awareness was the realization that there's a part of me that's lovable and wants to live and had lots to offer and was very sweet and gentle. The part that I had identified with that was running the show was anything but that. And so there was one day where I was at home and I wrote something on a piece of paper. I had a Sharpie and I wrote, "Don't die" on it. And I stuck it on the mirror. And even in that moment again, I wasn't realizing what I was doing, but upon getting some space, day after day after day, I realized, oh my gosh, that was me talking to myself. I had to get some space for myself to realize that there was another aspect of me. I had to get that. And so that's the way that happened for me. And it happened very quickly, because after that, then I said, well, I guess I got to go back to school and figure some stuff out and go find some some science for all this stuff that I had been intuiting my whole life. Like, there's a lot of stuff that I know, but I don't really know. And I need to go find some language and some data for it.
So what did that journey look like?
Going back to school,
Yeah.
soon after that, I decided, I said, well, I'm just going to go back to school. And I went to St. Edward's campus one day and I went and hung out and realized this is the place. Like, I felt into the space and I said, oh, I'm already here. This is where to go. And so I did my undergrad in a year. I went back and I completed my graduate degree. I went in and I did systems theory and really got into the neuroscience stuff. And there was that part of me that was still really rebellious because as I was going through and having such a traumatized brain, I was getting the message that I would never feel love, that I would be able to intellectualize it and that it would be something that I could point out and label, but that I wouldn't necessarily feel it. And that was a bit of a concern for me too. So I kept trudging along though. I think that part of me that gets so infuriated was what kept me going.
That determination, that will center.
Oh, yes.
Which I find is like when maybe you have some early struggles in life, you get a really strong will center, which is helpful to get you through those challenges. But then at a certain point, we needed to like relinquish the driver's seat.
Mm-hmm.
That is a little more testy when you've got a really strong will center to give that over to your higher aspects of self.
It is challenging.
Which are the higher aspects of self is really the only one that can take you on the rest of the journey, the kind of journey we're talking about here, which is really, I think it's a good description to say that you're using the quantum field and the power of story to shift your physical expression.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. I will, to add on to that, going back to the shadow work too, is if I found myself telling stories a lot in my head and living out different lifetimes, so to speak, that weren't here, rooted in this. And I was moving out of those other spaces. And that's where I got into a lot of trouble. I was thinking for other people. I was creating more chaos. I was caught in my own web, so to speak. And when I caught on to that was when I started doing shadow work. And I realized, if I look at somebody else and I think this about them, who's saying that? And I would start questioning who was doing the narrating. So it really became, who's the narrator? Who's doing the storytelling? Tell me more about you. What's your thing? What's your game? What's your plan? What you got going on?
Why are you telling this story?
Exactly. And really testing that in a way that was safe enough, because a lot of times, and when clients come in on fire or as the bull in the china cabinet, that, they're just, I want to get out of my head. I go, oh boy, that's not what's going to happen. It's about relating to that aspect of self and really figuring out what that aspect is trying to accomplish. Right? And like you were saying, it was some old stuff that it used to do that, it used to get its needs met or this type of thing, but it's really not playing out well. And in this now, it's really messing things up. And it from the observer, I can imagine that's really chaotic and fragmented and disorganized and all kinds of things. Be interesting to go back and look at another version of myself before I understood this and just watched my own behavior outside of myself.
That would be fascinating. That kind of is actually what I've done, because I wrote my memoir about as I was going through my healing process, right? Because I was told that was really important to write it as I went along. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And intuitively, I understood why, but I don't think I ever really I just intuitively knew, okay, that makes sense. Sure, I'll start writing as if it's happening now. I'll just do it. Yeah, thank goodness I did, because years later, I mean, I've every time I read that book, another year later, I can't believe it.
Doesn't it just enrich the experience all the more?
It's just so amazing to me. I'm like, that is, I was like that, like actually have to ask, like, are you sure? And then even making this album for my son, I made this album for his 18th. He's graduating high school, and I made this album of 18 years of his life, and just went through and pulled out pictures, and I'm seeing these pictures of me as his mother, and I'm like,
Oh,
was that even me? Like, I can't relate. So I think, I guess maybe there are some lifetimes that you can have on earth where you can completely remember yourself and you identify as that person 10 years later or 5 years later or 1 year later from that picture. You go, yes, that's still me. But that's not the life I'm living. That I'm living a different kind of life. I'm living this kind of life where things are happening so rapidly. The transformation, the inner transformation work is happening so rapidly that I could have a picture of me from, like, I literally have to redo my videos on my website about every 3 months.
that
Otherwise, they're out of sync with who I am now.
that thank you for saying that. That makes so much sense.
Still so much work.
Yes, it is a lot of work, isn't it? It's truly an emergent life. Dan Siegel, the whole neurobiology community, we talk about trauma and integration, right? Integrating the parts, making the person whole. But at a certain point, then there's an emergent aspect that happens. And there's this emergence, and I think of a cloud and its recursive nature, like he talks about. It's just billowing, and it doesn't disappear, but it's always changing, and it's still there, but it's tumbling into something else or becoming something else. It was the panda bear, and now it's a flower or whatever. Um, we're constantly changing. So thank you for saying that, because sometimes I'll look at my website too, and I'm like, that's just not, no, that's not it.
It used to be it. It was your best understanding of it at the time.
Yes.
And then you changed and evolved, and now it's no longer the best understanding of it. It's gone. It's done. Like, that is no longer relevant.
You know what else came up for me right now is thinking of the wave, as the wave is tumbling and it's moving along, and it's like you're at the crest of that wave.
You are, but then there is the undertow. And I think, because I just want to say I've experienced a little bit of the undertow in the last month or so, since
Mm-hmm.
I launched the audio version of the book, because a wider audience is experiencing the book now than previously.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I feel the energy of it. People reviewing my past through the story, right? They're listening to the story that I told in my voice of me at another time in the past, and I'm feeling that somehow. And it's making me uncomfortable, because that part of me now is coming forward from depths within me and saying, hey, look, I'm seeing what you created with your life. That's really interesting. And I don't know if I deserve any of this.
What part is coming up?
It's like this, the one that judges, just, I had to walk out of my life, like, and leave this state of chaos, that was in me. And I had to go on a healing journey. I had to, like, close that chapter and then go on this new journey. And I think it's the part of me that had to close the chapter. And even though a lot of review happened, there's still, like, this, like, it's almost like, it's Gay Hendricks in The Big Leap talks about the glass ceiling. Have you read that book? It's such a good book. And it's the glass ceiling, right? And then there's 4 pillars that keep the glass ceiling in place, so you can't expand your happiness or your love past that glass ceiling. And I think when you've had trauma, or you've had a diagnosis, or you've had um, any story limiting, let's call it life limiting, story limiting things, then this glass ceiling is in place
Mm-hmm.
firmly in your being. And when you start to reach outside of that glass ceiling, you get sucked back down. So you've got to deal with the four pillars. And I think this re-releasing my memoir has been that way of like becoming aware of what pillars are in effect holding my glass ceiling, because my life has already gone on.
Uh-huh.
But I think part of you can be inside dragging its heels. I guess that's what I'm saying.
Do you want to go and like do something with the glass ceiling? Maybe we could go and like paint it or pay homage to it and
smash it.
I thought about that too because I'm kind of destructive, but I didn't want to break your glass ceiling.
I am destructive.
I'll
Yeah. Destruction and chaos leads to growth, So when you're willing to destroy your story of yourself, then you're really willing to evolve into a new possibility.
Yeah.
And isn't that what we're talking about, Andrea? In order to heal, don't you have to break some eggs?
You do. Lots of creation. You got to have the destruction. They're one and the same. Going back to the story, because it was about the chronic illness, what I ended up doing was getting into epigenetics and I took the word trauma and I recoded it and I called it taking radical accountability for unifying my abilities. Yeah.
Say that one more time.
Taking radical accountability for unifying my abilities.
Oh, I love that.
I was tired of the trauma. So I was tired of the words. I always get so upset about, this word, it doesn't explain it. And this word is hard. I don't like it. So I took the trauma word and did that. And then I took radical accountability for giving myself diabetes. Because what 10-year-old gives themselves diabetes, right? And like really puts themselves in the hospital and like who does that? But epigenetics really helped me with that. And I really took this on and I said, no, I did this to myself. And I was able to create a narrative that helped me understand why my body would want to start to slow down the production of insulin so my blood sugar would rise because I was in a chronic state of stress. So when we're in chronic states of stress, we need more sugar to maintain that. So my body was actually doing something beautiful and intelligent for me. And that's how I was able to say, oh, you're safe. You're a safe thing. Oh, okay. And that's how that changed.
I really appreciate you saying that because I say this to a lot of people and I think they think I'm being mean. And I had one client get very upset with me because she said, I'm sick of you and all these other coaches who say that I'm responsible for my Lyme disease. It's a hard one for people to swallow. It's like, yes, sweetie. And it's not a judgment and it's not a blame. We're not talking about judgment and blame, which is the usual paradigm of responsibility.
Yes.
This is not that paradigm. This is like just slice that off and put that over in another galaxy. Now in this galaxy, it just means that I make up a story that gives me wiggle room to work with this and untangle it in the energy. And the only way I can work with it and untangle it in the energy is if I take responsibility to what? To become the narrator, to become the storyteller, to become the creator of this thing. If I'm not the creator of the thing, I can't refashion it.
Mm-hmm.
I can't change it.
Mm-hmm. Most people coming into therapy are feeling not powerful. And I'm like, whoa, you're really powerful. Look at what you're creating.
And they get like, what?
Oh yeah, sometimes. But that's a great start. Like to get that kind of reaction, there's something to work with there. I'd rather have the strong reaction than this kind of like, yeah, okay. Because then that's just going with the same
That's
thing.
just apathy.
Yeah, the resistance is really helpful.
Yeah, this is why destruction is good, people. That's why disruptors are good. Say thank you, Carrie Hummingbird. For being willing to destroy everything in order to build something, because if you don't like your current circumstance, whining and complaining about it isn't going to change it. That doesn't work. Try it. Just run the experiment and see if that works. Probably it's not going to work. Feeling bad about yourself because of it, that's not going to change anything. Make you feel bad.
Yeah.
But like putting on like the writer's cap and getting your pen out and going, I wonder why I, as a soul, decided to create this plot line from which I am going to miraculously escape. Like, what is this story? You know, it's kind of like leave the villain in the room by themselves with all the tools they need to escape and make a beautiful life, right? Like you never actually kill the villain when you could. You leave them in the room with a very predictable escape.
So glad you said that. You know, what for me was, but sometimes it's kind of fun. And that's how I kind of engage those parts. I'm like, because I love to suffer. I'm good at it. Oh, I am good at pouting and tantruming. And, you know, someone's going to play that role because otherwise the production wouldn't go on. You don't just clap for the good guy or the bad guy on stage. You clap for the whole production.
Well, you love the drama and you know, my mom still watches soap operas, you know, and it's like 4 decades later and she's still watching them. Soap operas have their place, you know, and if you want to live in the drama triangle and you want to live the soap opera and you want to experience that, there's nothing wrong with that experience. Immerse in it. You know, I love John Rasmussen is a shaman from my lineage, and I get, you know, every so often I'll get a healing from him. And he shared this story on a Soul Nectar broadcast. He said that when he was a little kid, he wanted to see if the pain had an end. Like if you cut your arm and you stuffed it with salt, would there be a limit to the pain? And what he found was through experimentation, because he was just twisted like that. Listen, people that end up being shamans, they like to explore the limits, okay? And he found out, he's like, there's no limit. The pain has a limit. The pain always stops at 10. It never goes above 10. The pain stops at 10. However, joy is, you know, is limitless. It doesn't have a limit. So you can be afraid of the pain, but the pain always has a limit.
Mm-hmm. Or you can actually eroticize the pain, and that's what will happen is people will actually get really euphoric. I remember stories and my own personal experiences of people like really getting to the brink and finding like nirvana.
Joy in the pain. And it sounds so twisted from the other side. Or like if the pain's not big enough yet, it hasn't gotten to that place. And I think that these are the concepts that people just go, that blows my mind. I don't want to know that. But sometimes that's how do you think people come up with the phrases like the line between pleasure and pain is thin or something like that? Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? Like, where do those come from? Human experience.
Right. One and the same.
Yeah. And so, you know, you can get angry at yourself for choosing this life plan. Sometimes I do.
It's kind of fun, and that's what I was saying. It's kind of fun sometimes. There's an aspect of myself that really, really understands as the regulator. Like, okay, go and feel that for a little bit, because it's part of the human emotion. We get to feel the spectrum of emotions.
We're not going to bypass it,
right? But don't like take anybody down and like start causing chaos and running amok and doing that kind of stuff.
Well, but as soon as you said that, though, you look joyful. So maybe there's a part of you that actually likes that.
I do a little bit, you know, that's the whole point of like loving the destruction and the creation. It was nice to dismantle and shred myself apart because this wouldn't have shown up. So I had to really kind of enjoy the fact that I was going through that. And I had to write that out, so to speak, and live that story.
I think the main message I'm getting from this conversation is that you've got to be willing to take the journey. You've got to be willing to let go of everything you think you are, destroy it all. Like, and sometimes spirit, universe, God will bring you to the breaking point where you're in so much pain, suffering in your mind, wherever the pain is, that you're willing to let it all go, because it's got to be better than this on the other side.
Right, resistance.
Right?
And when you're literally disintegrating a storyline or a cohesion, and you're trying to build something new, that transition is really where people come in, and they either want support, or they're talking to family more, or they're really feeling uncertain because there's no stable ground. It's literally changing into something else, and that's where we get a little scared. But there was something else I was going to say.
Disorientation is a good thing.
Paranoia is real. I've experienced paranoia because I was doing too much. You're saying shamans, like, they like to go far. Well, I went pretty far out, and I realized, whoa, this is way farther than I can even handle. And I had to dial back in and find some ground again to be able to make sense of the world and who I
that's
am.
a really good, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like what was that movie about the war or whatever? They were in the boat. Gosh, it has I'm not going to remember it. Anyway,
Commander in Chief.
so if you get off the boat and go wandering in the woods, you're on your own.
Okay.
Because really, like, what you're talking about is like way bushwhacking in the field of consciousness to see what's possible. You're going to test your own limits, and you can do that, but then also remember the breadcrumb trail back, because you want to be able to get back on solid ground, like you talk about, where things are familiar again. But if you can hang out in the discomfort of not knowing, the longer you can hang out in that discomfort, actually things are shifting on the quantum level. They actually, it's like jet fuel. It can like blast you faster into a new potential if you can be willing to hang out in the not knowing part.
Exactly. That's why people decide to give themselves Lyme's disease or do these really radical things. It's actually a catalyst.
It's a catalyst. It's a teacher. I keep telling people that. That was my Skills Not Pills thing. I was like, it's a teacher. It's teaching you something. You signed up for an advanced course called Lyme, or called cancer, or called whatever, autoimmune disorder that I cannot figure out. And you signed up for that. Why? Because you had to tighten up your skills. In order to deal with that, you had to get to know yourself intimately. Know thyself at every level: physical, mental, emotional, familial, ancestral, environmental. Look at the graduate PhD level education you had to get in order to survive. Dang, I honor you people. All I had to do was go crazy,
Well, I went there too. I was crazy for going to the graduate level work. That's where I sit there and I go, man, I really put myself into some kind of debt to go and get this information.
That also, but you have to let go of it, because it's just the material plane. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's really a joy to hold space for people as they're doing their stuff, because I've been able to push space in my own world so much that my container grows for other people.
There you go. You have a bigger container because of all the struggles. And I know that you also, you're very mindful with your story, the story that you tell about yourself.
Yes.
Because it creates energy.
Yes, it does. You gotta speak to it, not from it. There's that thing.
Not inviting it back. It's a good tip, people. When you start to transform and change your life, you can tell the old story from a new place, but you never want to tell it from the old place anymore.
And that's one of the
because that's when it just reaches and grabs you and sucks you back in, like the mafia, like pulling you back in, and you don't want that. You want that to be that time, that other person over there, and then you can talk about it like la la la, and then cut the cords to it. It's no longer who you are. It's just part of the past.
Yeah.
And at the same time I say that, there's this part of like also just really honoring, like as I feel people, because I am really sensitive, as you are. And when I feel people reading my story or thinking about my story, it's like a chord, right? Like I can feel it at the edge of my field. People are thinking about it, it's like, mm. And it's touching a part of my past, and like,
Well, thank you for doing that
it's
vulnerable act.
so uncomfortable.
You did it. Thank you so much, because now that's out there and that's going to speak to people who.
Yeah, I did it to help people.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. But I have to be really mindful in my own bubble that I don't let that infiltrate. This is my current reality bubble. That is not, I can honor that woman that I was. I totally do. I have such compassion. And not, and then that doesn't like take the driver's seat ever. Like, not.
That I am receiving that. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Not.
Totally.
Yeah. Was, this is. This is what is. That never again is.
It's interesting where I find too is that when you don't pay attention to things so much, it disintegrates. Those older lives can literally go away because you're not.
That's why it's so weird. You can't look at your picture anymore and like resonate. It's like not you, which I also think is weird, because I think that I didn't used to be that way before I started transforming so quickly. In my previous life, it seemed like nothing changed.
Groundhog Day.
Yeah. And I felt like I would look at the pictures and I'd be like, oh, I still feel how icky that was in that moment. Or, you know what I'm saying? Like I would look at things and have memories of it, and the memories would come gushing back, and I'd be like, oh, that's so icky of that experience. Or, oh, that was so wonderful on that day. Like I'd have these emotional attachments to it.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't really happen for me anymore, only if it's really pretty recent.
Okay, you're bringing up another, call it a skill, but I used to take a daily picture of myself and I would swipe through them, and I was able to see, what part had shown up or who was available. And
Oh,
yeah, it was a visual diary. So I've done that before. And then the journaling, like you were talking about, because I've got like a whole decade of journals as well, I would write to my future self, right? Future, past, whatever. But I would write to myself from myself. So when I read it, it would say things like, remember that. Remember that you said you didn't want that. So I was keeping a time log for myself. We really are dimensional travelers. So that was my time log. And
wow,
it was really powerful.
and that's how you climbed your way out of that physical expression that you were experiencing, because you were in that classroom, which you are no longer in. That is really fascinating. So I just want you guys to honor that. Anybody who's willing to tell you there's a transformationist who's willing to tell you their old story in order to help you bridge into a new story for yourself is doing so at personal risk. And
saying that
it is so mindful of not bringing back those circumstances that we are now talking about, which we no longer wish to exist and do not exist, in fact, anymore. because see how tricky it is. You have to be careful about how you talk about things. Some people will come in for me for healings and we'll shift the thing and then give them the new agreement. We'll erase the old agreement and bring in the new agreement. And then I tell them, you're going to be so tempted to go tell this story to your friends because it was miraculous what you just experienced. And don't share the story. Like, don't talk about that old thing anymore. Just don't talk about it. Talk about what you want. Talk about the new agreement. And when you feel the energy of it trying to hook its little nail in you again, repeat the new agreement a lot and get in the new space, because otherwise if it gets a toehold, it'll start creeping back in. So you don't want that. And the people that don't heed my advice are back in 6 months. So
yeah. Different, right? You start talking about others and this, and it just The energy goes everywhere.
Uh,
Right now.
right now in the present.
Yes.
And we're storytellers. It's very hard to stay in the present. Because we like stories.
Lots of the science of story, because I'm like, don't tell stories. Ta-da!
Oh no, but Andrea, tell good stories. I'm in that. How about that mode? Like, tell the story you want.
Yeah.
And some people will say, well, Carrie Hummingbird, you've just created a fantasy by telling the story you wanted to hear.
Yeah.
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 Okay.
Imagination station.
Did it work? I mean, who's on a bunch of shows? You know, who's a soul guide now? Yeah, I did. I made it all up. Every bit of it.
Isn't it great?
It's awesome. And you can do the same thing too. Because it's quantum energy.
Oh, it's so fun. You're playing.
You're playing. It's fun. You're like a child. The more you can be like a child, playing pretend, that's how it works.
That's it.
That's it.
Imagine like
that's how it works, people. That skills not pills movement that just came out of nowhere, poof. And so it is. Founder.
Right? And it's like the work and play, right? That old paradigm of the idea of work. Ooh, I don't like that word, but
it's play. You're the author of your life. You get to decide. You get to write the story of your life with your thoughts and your words and the stories that you tell about yourself. So tell a good story. And then when you get really masterful, which is way beyond Carrie Hummingbird, you can stop telling stories, as Andrea suggests. In the meantime, tell a better story.
Right. It depends. It depends. There's different like levels and qualities of stories, right? The quality of a story. Some people talk about ideas. Some people talk about like situations or events, or some people talk about people. Have you seen or heard any of that?
There's totally those like gossip stories, and those aren't helpful to anybody.
No. Like that's the kind of storytelling that you don't.
You can just leave those. You can leave that out. Don't gossip on yourself either.
Oh gosh, no.
Unless there's a purpose. Like I gossip about myself on these shows to teach. I don't do it. It's the intent, right? I share stories from my past where maybe I misbehaved or something to illuminate a point. And then I'm always, what you may not see is that I'm always rewriting that story and filling it with love on the inside to close the gap on that.
Right. Right? There's the front side, but then you've got to go in and do the ceiling. I mean, true bridge worker talk right there.
Yeah. You got to work both sides.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know if you're sitting there and you're watching this video and you're like, this is, that's okay. It's planting seeds.
Yeah.
You don't have to understand it. It's okay. And if you do understand it, you'll like, thank God somebody's saying it.
You know, there's a great point too. There are a lot of things. Alan Watts was very, very integral part of developing. He helped me a lot. And there were things that he would say that I did not understand. And I was okay with that. Just because I didn't understand something doesn't mean that it's not valuable. There was a resonance there. There was a tone. There was a quality, the content of what he was talking about. There's a book that I've been trying to read for 10 years. And I keep opening the book and I go back to it. And I'm like, I've been reading it for 10 years. I just haven't finished it because I'm not quite there, but I keep going back.
But then at the right time, it'll all magically make sense.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, so just be where you are. I know my friend gave me a Dolores Cannon book years ago, and I opened it, and I'm like, this is too much. I don't understand this. And she's like, I thought you would love it, Carrie. And I couldn't even get into it at all. And I was like, gave it back finally. I was like, I just hopeless. I tried to read it, and I can't. And then I just got a healing from one of her students, and it was incredible. So I was like, oh, now I get the whole thing. I might have to open that book now.
Yep. It's interesting to go back to those things and just like keep going.
You're just not ready yet. So if this conversation is kind of like this, that's all right, because at some point it will permeate your field, and you'll start to understand the power of story and how you can use this new technology, which is really old technology that we forgot about. You can use this new technology and remember how it's used in your own life so that you start leveraging it in your own healing so that you can learn the lessons you were intended to learn from your current experience and then shift and transform through that and go on to another life journey of your choosing. Kind of.
Beautiful.
I had to put the kind of category. Your spirit will lead and you will follow.
Yes.
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, so how do people work with you? I think, is it always this mind-blowing when people come in to talk to you, or?
It's interesting because I meet people where they're at. I never know how I'm going to work with somebody. Somebody will call, they'll email me and say, hey, I want to work with you. And I'll say, let's have a chat. And we'll have a conversation much like you and I are now. And I'll meet them where they're at. Because again, my container, right, I've got a lot to hold. And there's some avenues that I won't go down. And there are some that I will, right? Is it a therapeutic match? But my responsibility is to hold presence in the container, and a lot of it is really integrative type of work, really getting people into the now and experiencing, whoa, this is now, and really feeling their power. And then what do I want to do with that? So getting some brakes on their system, right? Navigating the spacesuit that they're in and going, okay, because a lot of people come in, again, it's the China and the bull in the China cabinet, and they're trying to escape themselves. And I'm like, okay, first we just got to ground in. And then once people ground in and figure out a little bit of the skills, right, not the pills, then we can explore, right? Lock and load. I'm along for the journey. And it's really fun to manifest and help people like reflect things back. And oh man, it gets real fun. The beginning, it's not so fun for most people, but after that, it becomes an incredible journey for people. And they really do leave transformed and able to manifest and create their story.
You know, Andrea, I love that you said all that, because that's similar to how I work with people. And I also, they have that resistance at first because, well, okay, what's the resistance to doing this work, people? Is that coming from your higher self? No, it's coming from the personality. But the interesting thing is that it's a fascinating journey. Mm-hmm. This is so much more interesting than anything else. This is just as interesting as your favorite sci-fi movie. Because it's happening inside of you.
Yes.
Like
the journey.
It's incredible.
Nobody else can take that one. Just you. That's how
special. You're the only one. Mm-hmm. And so, okay, it's got some uncomfortable moments. Well, so does every sci-fi movie. It's a script. It's a movie. Would you want to see the movie that's called your life? If it was really boring, would you want to go to that movie? Like, there's nothing happening. I want one that's exciting. And that's why mine is exciting. It has a lot of twists and turns and things I didn't expect. And it kind of goes along with who I am at a soul level. I like that. So maybe this is just about accepting yourself and the journey that you chose to come on in this life, and taking the journey with somebody who like got a big container like Andrea, who can guide you on the journey through your story. What's the story you're telling?
Yeah. A lot of compassion. I'm going to put a plug for compassion right now.
Yes.
You can't just like pour salt, like you were saying, in the wound. I mean,
John did. He's extreme.
Then we're going into sadism, and I don't know.
He did it as an experiment to see like how big can pain actually get. Does it go beyond 10? Does it go to 11 or 12 or 15? Like, how far does it go? No, it
What's the infinity symbol?
stays at 10.
Yeah.
It stays at 10. Isn't that reassuring? The pain stays at 10. You don't have to fear the pain.
Pain is pain.
Pain is pain. It's uncomfortable, but pain is pain. Yeah, beautiful. Well, what a beautiful, I really loved this conversation. I think it went on for quite a while. Like I'm looking at, I'm like, I really enjoyed it, obviously.
I really enjoyed.
I lost track of time. Thanks for joining us. And if you guys want to work with Andrea, your website is thescienceofstory.com, is it not? Yeah, the science of stories. If you want to explore your story with somebody as interesting as Andrea, I think that could be really pretty fascinating. Look her up. Check her out.
Thank you.
Okay. Good seeing you, honey.
You as well.
Thanks for joining.
Bye.
Bye.